The gate had not closed properly in 9 months. It sagged from its upper hinge like a tired shoulder, the pine slats gone gray with weather, and every dawn it groaned once when the wind came down off the San Juan range and pressed against it. In the ranch yard below, a woman in a long gray wool dress and a black wool shawl stood with a tin cup of coffee cooling in her hands and listened to that groan the way another person might listen to a clock. She did not fix it. She had not fixed anything for 9 months. And this was a Thursday in late September of 1887. And Thursdays were the days Eliza Calloway allowed herself to remember that she was 42 years old and that everyone in Silver Fork, Colorado, had decided she would die alone. She was 5'6" and thin at the wrists, with graying auburn hair pinned in a low knot beneath a small dark bonnet, hazel eyes set deep from grief and weather, a straight nose, a mouth that had once smiled easily and now mostly held itself still. Her dress reached from her collarbone to the tops of her boots, buttons all the way up, sleeves to her wrists. She had 87 acres of thin grazing land in the Animas Valley, 23 head of cattle, a barn that leaned 3 degrees east, a house of squared logs with an east-facing window her husband had built her the spring before he died, and a front gate that would not close. The wind lifted. The gate groaned. She sipped her coffee. Down the wagon road from the direction of Durango, a rider was coming. She did not see him yet. Ethan Vance was 36 years old, 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with black hair cut short beneath a dust-brown flat-brimmed hat, a close dark beard, gray-blue eyes the color of a creek running under cloud, and hands scarred across the knuckles from 20 years of repair work. Fence posts, wagon axles, saddle rigging, cabin roofs, anything that broke and needed a stranger to make it whole again. He wore a long brown canvas duster over a faded blue shirt, dark trousers, worn brown boots. He rode a heavy bay gelding named Tucker, and behind his saddle was a canvas roll of hammers, chisels, 3 good handsaws, a coil of new baling wire, a small tin of nails he had counted twice in Pueblo, and 1 folded letter he had carried for 6 years and never opened. He had come west from Missouri along a route that had bent through 4 counties and 11 towns, and he did not, when asked, ever quite explain why. He came around the last bend of the wagon road and saw the sagging gate before he saw the woman. He had the trained eye of a man whose living was noticing what other people had learned to walk past. The upper hinge was cracked at the bolt seat. The lower hinge was starving for grease. The crossbar had warped from a winter of standing water. He counted these things in about the time it takes to draw 1 full breath. Then he saw her, standing with the tin cup, looking at him. "Morning," he said, and he touched the brim of his hat. "Morning," she said. She did not move. "I'm looking for the Calloway place. Man in Durango said there was work here for a hand who could mend." "You found the Calloway place. There isn't work." "He said you'd say that." She almost smiled. She had not almost smiled in a long time, and she noticed it, and she pushed it down because Thursdays were not for smiling. "Who said?" she asked. "Old fellow at the feed store. Silver spectacles. Said his name was Hollis. Hollis Trent." "Yes, ma'am." He said if I rode out to the Calloway place, I'd find a gate that wouldn't close, and past the gate a barn leaning 3 degrees east, and past the barn a woman who'd tell me there wasn't work. He said I should keep offering anyway. She held her coffee cup a little tighter. Hollis Trent had been her husband's oldest friend. He had known her 40 years. "There isn't money for a hand," she said. "Didn't ask for money yet." He got down off Tucker. He did not tie the horse. He walked past her, past the tin cup and the gray dress and the deep-set hazel eyes, and he walked to the gate. He looked at the upper hinge. He put 1 scarred hand on the crossbar and pressed until the warp gave a small answering pop. He looked at the lower hinge. He straightened. He turned back to her. "A gate that won't close is just a promise no one keeps," he said, quietly, not to her, almost to himself, and then to her. "If it's all the same, ma'am, I'll fix it this morning while you decide about the rest." He did not wait for her answer. He walked back to Tucker, unrolled his canvas kit, took out a hammer and a chisel and the coil of baling wire, and he set to work. And Eliza Calloway, 42 years old and widowed 9 months, stood on her porch with a tin cup of coffee going cold in her hands and watched a stranger she had not hired begin to keep a promise on her behalf. Her husband's name had been Samuel. He had built the house in 1876 with his own hands, and he had built the east-facing window in the spring of 1886 because Eliza had said once, in passing, that she liked to see the first light on the mountains before she started her day. He had died in December of 1886 of a chest fever that came on in 3 days and took him in 5. They had been married 19 years and had buried 2 infant sons in the small fenced plot behind the house, one in 1871 and one in 1874, and after the second boy Eliza had stopped speaking of children, and Samuel had stopped asking, and they had loved each other the quiet way people love when the loud kind of love has already cost them everything they had to give. When Samuel died, Silver Fork decided, kindly and firmly, that Eliza Calloway would sell the ranch, move into town, take a room above the general store, and become the sort of dignified widow a small town knows how to fold into itself. Instead, she stayed. She ran 23 head of cattle with the help of one aging neighbor boy on Saturdays. She let the barn lean. She let the gate sag. She wore black through the spring and then gray through the summer, and by September she had become, in the mouth of the town, the woman who would die alone. She had heard the phrase twice at the mercantile, spoken kindly, spoken as fact. She heard the ring of the hammer on the hinge bolt. She went inside. She poured out the cold coffee. She poured a fresh cup. She brought it out and set it on the top rail of the porch and did not offer it. She sat in the porch chair Samuel had made her, and she watched the stranger's shoulders as he worked, and she waited for the part of herself that was supposed to send him away. It did not come. The hammer rang. The chisel bit. The wind came down off the San Juan range and pressed against the gate, and the gate did not groan, because the stranger had lifted it off the post and set it in the yard on 2 clean sawhorses he had cut in 11 minutes from a length of dead cottonwood by the barn. He worked in silence for an hour and 30 minutes by the sun. He drank the coffee she had not offered without asking. When he set the cup back on the rail, it was empty and the rim had been wiped clean with his thumb. By noon the gate hung true. It swung a slow arc on greased hinges and settled shut with a small, satisfied click, and Ethan Vance stood in front of it with his hands on his hips and a small line of dust across his forehead. And he said, "There." Eliza Calloway sat on her porch and did not say anything. "I'll take my leave," he said, "unless there's more." "The barn leans," she said. "I noticed. 3 degrees east. I noticed that too. There isn't money. I recall you mentioning." She was quiet a long time. The wind lifted. The gate did not groan. "There's a bunk in the tack room," she said. "There's cornmeal in the kitchen. There's stew on Sundays. If you can make yourself useful past the gate, you can stay past the gate." "Yes, ma'am. I'm not hiring you." "No, ma'am. I'm letting you keep offering." He almost smiled. He pushed it down, the same way she had, and for a small strange moment on that Thursday in late September of 1887, the two of them were doing the same private work of not yet smiling, and neither of them knew it. He slept in the tack room that night. He was up before her the next morning. By the end of the week, the barn stood 1 degree east instead of 3. The chicken coop had a new latch, and the pump handle no longer stuck in the cold. He did not speak much. He worked. On the 7th day she found, without any announcement, that the east-facing window her husband had built her had been recaulked and reglazed. The old brittle putty scraped clean, the pane sitting square in its frame for the first time in 2 winters. He had not mentioned it. He had done it in the 2 hours after supper on a Tuesday, and she had come to the window on Wednesday morning to watch the first light come up over the mountains and had found the light coming in cleaner than it had in a year. She stood at the window for a long time. The mountains were rose-colored on their eastern faces and blue-black in their shadowed folds, and the light came into the room the way it had come the first spring after the window was cut, when Samuel had stood behind her with sawdust still in his hair and said, in his quiet way, that the light was for her. She did not cry. Grief doesn't leave. It just learns to share the house with other things. She did not thank the stranger for the window. She did not know how. Instead, that evening at supper she set an extra spoon of preserves beside his cornbread, and he ate it without comment, and both of them understood, in the way 2 quiet people always understand each other, that a thing had been said. The town noticed. Silver Fork was 740 people spread across 4 streets and a river bend, and it noticed the way small towns notice. Slowly, sideways, and all at once. By the 2nd week, the mercantile knew. By the 3rd week, the church knew. Millie Barrow at the mercantile counted out Eliza's salt with a slower hand and asked, without asking, how the hand at the ranch was settling in. Reverend Hoyt at the church door on the last Sunday of September said only, holding Eliza's gloved hand a beat too long, that he had heard the barn was standing straighter. Even the Halverson boys, who delivered Saturday cordwood, had begun to say sir to a man they had not once been introduced to. By the fourth week Hollis Trent, silver-spectacled and 81 years old, rode out on his slow gray mare with a jar of his wife's plum preserves and a face that pretended he had not orchestrated a single thing. "He fixing?" Hollis asked, sitting on the porch, not looking at Eliza. "He's fixing. Good hand?" "Good hand." "Talk much?" "No." Hollis nodded slowly. He set the preserves on the rail. He looked at the gate. "That your fix?" he asked. "His held?" "Held." Hollis was quiet a while. Then he said, "You know, a man doesn't stay in a tack room past October in this valley." "I know. Winter's coming." "I know that too, Hollis." He did not say anything more on the subject. He rode back into town before dusk. And 2 days later, the first letter arrived. The letter was on Silver Fork Cattleman's Bank letterhead, and it was signed by a man named Cyrus Whitfield, and it was very polite. Mr. Whitfield understood that the Callaway Ranch, being run by a lone widow of admirable spirit but limited means, might benefit from a fair and generous offer of purchase. Mr. Whitfield thought that $1,100 represented a very fair price for 87 acres of thin grazing land, given the current condition of the property and the widow's best interest. Mr. Whitfield hoped she would consider it. Mr. Whitfield remained her humble servant. Eliza folded the letter twice and set it on the kitchen table. At supper she did not mention it. Ethan Vance ate his stew and buttered his cornbread and did not ask. She washed the dishes. He dried them. When the dishes were done he went to the door, and then he stopped, and then he came back to the table and he said, "There was a rider on the ridge this afternoon, watching the north pasture." "Not one of yours?" "No," she said. "Not one of mine." She put the letter in his hand. He read it standing at the table with his hat still on and his mouth doing nothing at all. When he was done he folded it back on its 2 creases and set it down. "Fair," he said, "is a word bankers use when they mean fast." "Yes," she said. He looked at her a long time. His gray-blue eyes had gone the color of a creek under cloud. "I've mended in 15 counties," he said, "and I've never known a fair price to come by letter. Nor have I." "You want me to stay past October, ma'am?" She had been waiting for the question and had not known it. Her hands were still wet from the dishwater. She dried them slowly on her apron. She looked at him across the kitchen of the house Samuel had built, and she said the truest thing she had said in 9 months. "I want the ranch to stay past October." He nodded once. "Then I'll stay." That night she stood at the east-facing window a long time and watched the moon come up over the San Juan range, and she did not know yet what to do with the second thing she had almost said and hadn't. October came in gold. The cottonwoods along the creek turned the color of struck brass, and the aspen higher on the ridge went the color of new fire, and the mornings carried a knife edge of coming snow. Ethan Vance built a lean-to for firewood on the north side of the barn in 3 days. He cut and stacked 4 cords by himself in the second week. He shoed the plow horse. He mended the crossbeam in the loft. He never once mentioned the letter, and the letter did not come again, but on 2 more afternoons there was a rider on the ridge, and on the 3rd afternoon the rider was 2 riders, and on the 4th day Cyrus Whitfield himself rode out from Silver Fork in a black wool coat on a clean black gelding. He was 54, silver-haired, soft-voiced, thin at the jaw, and he had the sort of face that reads scripture in public and ledgers in private. He came alone. He tied his horse at the newly hung gate and did not comment on it. He walked up to the porch with his hat in his hand. "Mrs. Callaway, Mr. Whitfield, I hoped we might speak." "Speak." He did not sit. She did not offer. "I've come," he said, "in the spirit of neighborliness. My letter, I fear, was cold in its expression. That was not my intent. I hold the note on the north 40 of the Bergen place. I hold the water rights on the Halverson Creek bend. I have, this month, come into a position to consolidate 3 adjacent parcels into a single working operation, one that could carry this valley through hard winters better than any single smallholder ever could. Your 87 acres are Forgive me, ma'am, the last piece of a fair picture. I am prepared to offer $1,400. That is very near your husband's original purchase price, corrected for what the land has been through since. It is more than fair. It is, I believe, in your best interest. Behind her, in the yard, Ethan Vance was setting a new post at the corner of the kitchen garden. He did not stop working. He did not look up. Mr. Whitfield, Eliza said, my husband built this house with his hands. My sons are buried behind that barn. My gate closes for the first time in 9 months. I am not selling. Mrs. Calloway, I am not selling. You will find, Cyrus Whitfield said, still soft, still polite, that a widow running 87 acres in this valley will face a long winter and a longer spring. I would not like to see you forced by weather into a decision you could have made in comfort in September. Then you will not like the winter, Mr. Whitfield. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked past her at the man setting the post. He put his hat back on. He walked down off the porch to his horse, and he mounted, and he turned in the saddle, and he said, I will call again in a month. You will find the gate closed, she said. He rode away. Ethan Vance drove the post home with 3 clean strokes. He did not speak of the visit until supper, and when he did, he said only, a man who talks about your best interest is a man building a fence out of your own boards. She almost smiled again. She turned to the stove instead, and she stirred the stew that did not need stirring, and she said, without turning back, that there was a rifle in the parlor cabinet that had been Samuel's, and that it had been cleaned in July, and that the key was in the tin on the shelf above the sink. He said only, yes, ma'am, and he did not ask for the key, and she did not offer it, and both of them slept better that night for the fact that it had been named. The month bent toward November. On the first Sunday in November, Ethan came in from the yard with his hands full of small splintered pieces of wood, and he set them on the kitchen table, and Eliza saw that they had been the wooden marker she had put behind the barn in the spring of 1874, the second son's marker, and that it had been rotted through at the base and pulled out clean in the wind. He did not say anything about it. He built her a new one that afternoon from cured oak he had been saving for a tool handle. He carved the name and the year with a chisel and a steady hand, and he set it in the ground behind the barn with fresh stones packed around the base, and he did not tell her he had done it. She found it on her Monday walk. She stood there a long time with the wind in her shawl. That is what love looks like when it doesn't announce itself. It just quietly faces east. The trouble came on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of November. She had gone into Silver Fork for salt and a bolt of dark blue flannel, and when she rode back into the yard on her small brown mare she saw the north fence had been cut in 3 places along the ridge and 11 head of her cattle were gone. Ethan was already at the break in the wire when she came up. His hat was pushed back. His mouth was hard. Cut clean, he said. Guaircates. Not weather. Whitfield's men. He'd never touched the cutters himself. She sat on the mare and looked at the cut wire and felt, for the first time in 9 months, something in her chest that was not grief. It was colder and harder and older, and it had a use. I'll find them, Ethan said. We will. He looked up at her. His gray-blue eyes changed. Yes, ma'am. They rode out at first light on Thursday. They found the 11 head in a box canyon 9 miles north, held loose by 2 young men in oilcloth coats who were being paid. It turned out $3 a head to keep the cattle there until Sunday. Ethan Vance did not draw a weapon. He rode into the canyon with his hands empty and his voice level, and he said, Boys, that's Calloway stock. You know it. I know it. The man who paid you knows it. You've got 2 choices. You ride out now and I don't know your names. Or you stay, and by Sunday I know your names, your father's names, and the church your mothers sit in. The younger of the 2 men swallowed. The older man said, We didn't want the work. Then I'll forget I found you doing it. They rode out. Eliza and Ethan drove the 11 head home in the low November light, and it began to snow on the last 3 miles, and the cattle bawled low in the cold, and neither of them spoke because words at that hour would have been smaller than what had happened. That night, at the kitchen table, Ethan Vance took out the folded letter he had carried for 6 years. He laid it on the table between them. He did not open it. He said, My wife's name was Mary. She died in the spring of 1881. Fever. We had a daughter. She died the same week. I have carried this letter, which she wrote me the winter before, from Missouri to Kansas to Nebraska to Wyoming to Colorado, and I have not opened it because I have been afraid that when I open it there will be nothing left of her I have not used up. I am telling you this because you asked me nothing, and I owe you my nothing back. She reached across the table. She put her hand on the letter. She did not pick it up. When you're ready to open it, she said, you open it in this kitchen. He looked at her a long time. He nodded once. The confrontation came on the first day of December, and it came at the gate. Cyrus Whitfield rode out with 2 men behind him, both in long coats, both armed openly. He stopped at the gate. Eliza and Ethan stood on the inside of it. The gate was closed. It had not sagged in 10 weeks. Mrs. Calloway Whitfield said, Mr. Whitfield, I have come as I said I would, and I said what you would find. Whitfield looked at the gate. He looked at Ethan Vance. He looked back at Eliza. I am prepared, he said, to raise the offer to $1,700. In light of the winter. No, Mrs. Calloway, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, Mr. Whitfield. You are being persistent. You have lost 11 head. We have 11 head back. He paused. His soft voice went a shade softer. I understand, he said, that your hand has been of some help this fall. It is a fine thing. But a hand is a hand. He will move on. He is a man who mends. That is what he does. When he goes, the fence will fall and the barn will lean and the gate will sag, and you and I will be having this same conversation in April, and by then the offer will be $1,200. Ethan Vance stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He put one gloved hand on the top rail of the gate. He said, Mr. Whitfield, I've mended in 15 counties. In every one of them I have met a man with soft hands and a soft voice who told the widow he was thinking of her best interest. I have watched 2 of them ruin women who were 3 winters from being fine. So I will tell you what I told 2 boys in a box canyon on Thursday. You have 2 choices. You can ride away today, and no one in Silver Fork ever hears from me how the wire was cut on the north fence. Or you can press this. And by Sunday every rancher between here and Durango knows what your best interest looks like. Whitfield's jaw moved once. It was the first ungenerous thing his face had done. You have no proof. I have 2 names. I got them yesterday. From their mothers. The silence stretched. The wind came down off the San Juan range. The gate did not groan. Cyrus Whitfield touched the brim of his hat. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, in a voice that was not soft anymore but was not cruel either, Mrs. Calloway, I will grant you this. Your husband built well, and you have kept it. I did not think you would. I was wrong about that. I will not call again. He turned his horse. He rode back down the wagon road toward Silver Fork with his 2 men behind him, and none of them looked back.
Eliza Calloway stood at her gate.
Her hand was on the top rail beside Ethan Vance's. Their gloves were nearly touching. They were not quite. A gate that won't close, she said, is just a promise no one keeps. He looked at her. He looked at the closed gate. He looked back at her. Yes, ma'am, he said. Winter came in hard the following week and stayed hard through February. Ethan Vance did not move to the bunkhouse in town, which no one had suggested and no one needed to. He stayed in the tack room until the 3rd week of December, when the temperature in the tack room fell to 11 degrees at dawn and Eliza came out with a wool blanket and a folded piece of paper and said, There is a small room off the kitchen. It was my husband's for reading. It has a stove. You will use it.
Mom.
You will use it. He used it. The stove in the small room off the kitchen was iron and old and burned a slow, honest heat. There was a pine desk with a Bible on it, and one of Samuel's books on grafting apple stock, and a narrow bed made up with the wool blanket. Ethan Vance set the folded letter on the desk beside the Bible on his first night in the room and looked at it for a long minute and did not open it. He blew out the lamp. He slept the way a man sleeps when a door he has been walking past for 6 years is finally standing open on his own side. He opened Mary's letter on the 2nd Sunday in January. He opened it in Eliza's kitchen, at the table, with the stove burning low and the east-facing window showing the first pale light on the mountains. He read it twice. He did not weep, but his hands were still afterward the way a man's hands are still when he has finished a long piece of work. He folded the letter and put it back in his shirt pocket, and he said quietly, she wanted me to keep moving. She said I would find a place where the fixing meant something. She said I'd know it because it wouldn't feel like a job. She was right about that. She usually was. Eliza did not speak. She set her hand on the table between them, palm up. He set his hand on hers. Neither of them said anything more. The wedding was small. It was in April of 1888, at the little Methodist church in Silver Fork, and Hollis Trent gave Eliza away with a face that pretended he had not orchestrated a single thing. Eliza wore her mother's dark blue wool dress, buttoned to the throat, long-sleeved, hem to the boot. Ethan Vance wore a clean brown coat and the same worn brown boots. The whole town came. The town that had decided, in September, that Eliza Calloway would die alone stood in the pews and watched her not die alone. And it did what small towns do when they have been wrong. It brought casseroles and it brought preserves, and it did not mention the earlier verdict. At the reception in the churchyard, Cyrus Whitfield did not appear. He had sold his interest in the Bergen note to a rancher out of Pagosa Springs the previous month and had moved, quietly, to Denver. He sent, of all things, a small silver spoon by post, with a card that read, in a fine and honest hand, for a fair table. C. W. Eliza set the spoon in the kitchen drawer and did not speak of it again, but she did not throw it out. That April evening, Ethan Vance walked out to the gate at the end of the wagon road. He stood beside it a long time. The pine slats had gone from gray back to a warm honey color where the new sun caught them. The upper hinge was true. The lower hinge was greased. The crossbar was straight. He put one scarred hand on it. He said, quietly, to no one in particular, "A gate that won't close is just a promise no one keeps." He walked back up to the house. Behind him, the gate stayed closed against the mountain wind, the way it had stayed closed for 7 months now, and would stay closed for the 23 years Ethan and Eliza Vance would live together on that ranch in the Animas Valley, running first 23 head and then 60 and then 140, burying Hollis Trent in 1893, raising 2 adopted boys from the Silver Fork orphanage after the fire of 1895, and every autumn on the first Thursday of September walking down. Together in the early light to check the hinges of the gate they had never let fall again. Some things are named by what they do. A gate is a gate because it closes. A promise is a promise because it is kept. A man is a good man because he sets a post you did not ask him to set, and a woman is not alone because she has learned to let a stranger keep a promise on her behalf. Everyone in Silver Fork believed Eliza Calloway would die alone. Everyone in Silver Fork was wrong. And the reason they were wrong is not that fate reached down and changed its mind. The reason they were wrong is that on a Thursday in late September of 1887, a man rode down a wagon road, and he saw a gate that would not close, and instead of walking past it, he stopped. If you have watched this story to its end, thank you. Thank you for sitting with these 2 quiet people through a long fall and a long winter and one hard December morning at the gate. If you have ever felt that the town had already decided how your story ended, remember Eliza on the porch with the cold coffee, and remember that the person who will change your mind is often not the one who says the loudest thing, but the one who fixes the thing you had stopped believing anyone would fix. Watch for that person. Be that person if you can. And if the story sat with you the way it sat with me, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from tonight, and which one small thing in your own life you have been letting sag on its hinge. The one you know you could fix this week if you decided to. I read every one. Until next time, keep riding. And if you'd like to stay a little longer in this valley, our next story picks up 2 ridges over. In the spring of 1889, where a young widower named Caleb Rourke walks into a schoolhouse he hasn't set foot in for 11 years, and a schoolteacher named Anna Bell Whitmore turns from the blackboard and says the one sentence he has been afraid to hear since the war. Come ride with us.